Hello everyone, my name is Dustin with Mars Hill Technology, and today we're going to be continuing our series, Your Digital Front Door. This is week 2 of 4, and we're just kind of doing a series over your home environment when it comes to your network. We're going to be focusing more on your router and configurations to your router. Today we're going to be talking about your guest network, otherwise known as the side entrance. We're going to be discussing that a little bit more. So a lot of people don't know that your router actually has a second door, and that's your guest network or guest Wi-Fi. A lot of people, they just use or put all their devices, including their friends, some of the Internet of Things devices or smart devices that are in your home, all on the main network when we can utilize our guest Wi-Fi to the full extent that it's capable of, which is isolating your networks. So we definitely want to be talking about that today a little bit in our class. If your visitors and smart bulbs can reach your laptop, they're inside the house. They should not be. And that's what we're going to be talking about when it comes to a guest network. So what we're going to be covering today, we're going to be talking about what a guest Wi-Fi actually is, why visitors and smart devices belong on it, and then we're going to discuss how to turn it on, and it works the same as every router that can configure it. It's the same process for each of those routers. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how easy it is to do client isolation whenever you're setting up your Wi-Fi. That's an important fact. And it's just about 15 minutes to be able to configure this. If you followed us with week 1 with our video there about setting up your actual router and setting up your Wi-Fi in your actual router settings, this is a cake job. It's typically in the same menu under wireless as for guest Wi-Fi, and it's the easiest setting that up. So let's start with the first part, and that's one router with 2 different networks. It's a kind of a hard thing to think about that, or a difficult thing to think of, that you can have 2 different networks. And what that means is instead of having just one ISP provided network where you have all your devices on one network, you can kind of isolate them. And I've got a green bar here indicating that there's an isolation between these 2 different networks. And what we want to focus on is security. We want to make sure that security and the devices that we trust, that's the key word here, is trust, the items that we trust to be put on our main Wi-Fi, whatever Wi-Fi name that you actually made. And then everything else when you want to put on a guest Wi-Fi, which are things that we do not trust. This could be a visitor, a neighbor, or something that needs it on the network, or your family member, or even Alexa that you're talking to. You know, we want to make sure that these are isolated. All these different devices, that way they're not on your main network, because if they are on your network, your main network here, they can communicate to all of those devices. So we want to make sure that we're isolating these devices when they don't need to be on our network. Most of the time, these smart light bulbs, ring doorbells, smart TVs, the Alexa apps and all that kind of stuff, and your visitor phone, all that can be on another network, which is your guest Wi-Fi, and they can still communicate with the internet to get what they need to do. All these smart devices all have a hub or some sort of portal like a cloud instance where they needed to communicate to get patching or to be able to connect from your phone to the cloud and then to the device. But we don't need it on your actual Wi-Fi. You know, these are things you trust. Things that you do not trust, you want to put on your guest Wi-Fi. So let's talk a little bit about that. The big problem that we see today is, you know, your friend is on the couch, that's on the couch is inside the house. So when someone connects to your main Wi-Fi, your router treats them like family, meaning that it's going to display everything that you have access to, they can have access to because they're on your network. Their phone can see your shared folders, your printers, and sometimes even your cameras. So it's very important that we actually put these people on a guest Wi-Fi. So what we don't want to do, and this is what a lot of people are common problems that we see, you put a babysitter or a dog or cat sitter on your network. You know, they don't need that password to be on your main network or whatever. Let's say the contractor's running cables or needs to connect to the internet to be able to look up his job these days. You know, you can put them on the guest Wi-Fi. They don't need to be on your sensitive area or your trusted devices. Same thing with your cousins, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, kids, whatever. They're all over for vacation, like on Christmas or something. They don't need to be on your main Wi-Fi. You can put them on the guest Wi-Fi. You know, you can easily do that, and you can have that. Another one is Airbnb guests. You don't, if you got a duplex and you're sharing out one side or renting out one side of it, you don't want those Airbnb guests on your actual Wi-Fi. You want to be able to put them on a different one, which would be the guest Wi-Fi. So it's important to start configuring and kind of thinking in the ways of having a main Wi-Fi with trusted device, and then putting all these devices that you don't trust or people on a guest Wi-Fi. So what needs to go in there? What guest Wi-Fi changes? They still get that internet. So when we're talking, like, they're like, hey, I want to be on your Wi-Fi, and you get them on the guest network, their internet's going to behave the same. They're still going to get those speeds because the router's going to do its job, which is routing. It's just routing them on a different network away from your stuff. And they won't be able to see all those files and all those things that you share in your own home network. It's not available for them. It's only for your devices. So, and you don't have to keep changing your passwords and everything every time a guest comes over. You put them on the guest network, they're all good to go, and they have the guest part. So give people the internet. This is key, not the keys to the rest of your house. So we want to make sure that they can get internet to do their task or whatever they need to do. But we don't want to give them access to our main Wi-Fi. Oop, skip the slide here. Let me go back. So this is the second problem, and that's with smart devices. They're the weakest link in your home by far. One of the largest, one of the largest issues that a lot of homeowners have these days was getting hacked or compromised, or network getting compromised, are smart devices. Internet of Things. And I've got a display here, a little visual of all the different Internet of Things devices that are probed for default credentials, which we covered the last lesson and everything, to be able to try to hack and get on their network. So you could buy a $9 smart plug, put it on your main network, and that smart plug gets compromised with a security vulnerability, and it opens up a little hole into your actual network where a threat actor can move east and west on your network and be able to communicate to other devices and compromise those. So we want to make sure that we're isolating these things. And what can go wrong? It's as simple as a smart bulb with doesn't get a firmware update, and it gets popped, or it gets noticed in some sort of botnet, and then it becomes part of that botnet after it gets taken over. It could be the bulb attacker then gets on. They can scan your network and see any kind of devices or operating systems you have and vulnerabilities, and then try to exfiltrate that way. So it's very important that we kind of look at it in that approach. We don't want to have these things have issues. Open up your network for more risk in what it is already. So what can we do? Well, we can put those people on those guest networks. Those bulbs still work. They still get updates. They still talk to other apps, such as that cloud instance we talked about, but it can't see your laptop or those files that you have. That's an important part. If it ever gets popped, that's and it figures out like someone can be able to compromise it. It only compromises the devices on that network and not your sensitive things, which is your laptop, your NAS, your security cameras, your doorbell, whatever that you have that you want to trust that's actually on your home network. It won't compromise that. It basically isolates and contains the vulnerabilities into that actual network and not on your main one, which is a very important part. And there's one little toggle that we can do to isolate even those instances from being able to communicate or talk on the network on your guest network. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. And it contains everything. Everything gets contained, and it's isolated. So how can we do this? Well, we can turn it on. We can turn on with 4 steps here, and it works on every router. Every router, even if it's a standard consumer router, all the way up to a very commercial or industrial grade router, those all can have a guest network, and it's very easy to do. Like we talked about last week, we're going to log into our router, and that's 192.168.1.1 or 0.0.1 in our web address bar in your browser. Just like you type in Google, you type in that, you log in with your admin credentials that you either saved. In the last lesson, we talked about changing your admin credentials, or your admin credentials would be on the other side of your router. So flip your router over, you'll see the login information that you need to log in. Like I said, it's very wise to change your admin default passwords so someone can't try to log in that way. You want to do that and make sure you save it in a good spot. Then you're going to go to wireless, and then once you're under wireless, sometimes you'll see a little toggle, a little tab there. It says guest network, or it'll give you a check mark or a toggle that'll allow you to actually turn on a guest network. When you do turn it on, you can actually change your guest Wi-Fi name sometimes, and you want to keep it standard, nothing crazy or anything like that. Just put something like guest Wi-Fi or guest network, or guest is perfectly fine. try not to bring attention to your name on your actual Wi-Fi. Just get plain Jane guest network, guest Wi-Fi, or guest. It's simple as that. And then you want to toggle it on. We also want to make sure that we get a very secure password, just like you did for setting up your main network. A guest network's equally important to do that. So we want to make sure that you set up your password and that you choose to isolate the clients on that network. That's another good part to consider and everything. So we want to do that. A lot of people think, and we'll talk about it in these next slides up here, but we'll talk about printers. A lot of people are like, well, I want my guests to be able to print something or whatever. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that here in the future. So just keep that kind of tabled for now. So these are a couple of quick settings that you should probably start thinking about. Name it, password it, don't be lazy. Most routers will let you keep those defaults. Don't. Defaults defeat the purpose and everything. So if you have a guest network name, you don't want to do the same name as your actual network. You want to do a guest of some sort. So make sure you have a different name than your Wi-Fi name, and then something forgettable like we talked about in our last one, so someone can identify you. You don't want to put your name, last name. You don't want to put your street address or anything like that. So make sure that you make it not obvious to other people. Just adding that guest or whatever. You want to have it just where they don't know whose guest is what. You don't want to put that kind of information. And don't reuse the name of a guest that you might have saved before. So you don't want to use a guest name or something of that nature that someone might have some information to. So what do we need to do for a guest password? Well, you can use a passphrase or you can use a password to make, of course, your login information. So you can make this as unique and as complicated as you want, but I would definitely not do simple. Try to avoid simple and everything. Do still make a strong password with 12 plus characters. You can even use that passphrase if you need to as well. And once you make your guest network and you create it, just go ahead and write it down. Write it down on a piece of paper, print it out, whatever you need to do, and then have it right there. Guest Wi-Fi, when someone comes to your house, you can put it right there on a sticky note, and then they can see it and say, what's your password? And you can say, right over there is the guest network, and they can get on it and everything. So put them on that one. It's easy to change if you ever need to in the future too. So if you're only using your guest for your guest and not for other devices, you could change it every time a guest leaves, because you don't need to have any other device on there. So just depends on how you want to set it up and everything. Make sure it's different from your main password. Of course, it defeats the purpose if you have the same password, so don't do that. Don't be lazy. Now we're going to talk about that client isolation. So this is something that a lot of people don't think about, and a lot of manufacturers actually do this by default, but we want to make sure that you understand the client isolation part. So typically, if you had all your devices on your network, you could be able to communicate. And this little demo here is representing that these devices can talk to one another right here with this little dot going back and forth. As you can see, there's no division right here. So this would be one considered main network. And what we want to do is to think about isolating it. And it's as simple as clicking on that client isolation. When we click on client isolation, it stops that. You see how that little dot just stopped right there? And that's the reason we want to do that, is that way these things can't communicate with these other parts. So we want to isolate. And this is a setting that's very common in networks, and it's called client isolation. And that typically means that a bulb can't talk to your Ring doorbell, it can't talk to smart TV, can't talk to the visitors. All these items would basically just be communicating to the internet, to your router, and then out to whatever server it needs to do, and it won't be communicating to one another. So it's a very good way to keep things in their own lanes. That way they don't get issues when it comes to it. And like I said, when it comes to a main and a guest network, having two separate networks, they can't talk to one another either. They can't ping and talk to, like, you can't use a printer that's on the guest network, and so on and so forth. Well, now you're saying, well, I do want my guests to be able to print stuff. And my advice is this: unless you really want to do firewall rules that opens up avenues for your printer, the best thing to do is just say, hey, just send me an email with the document you need printed, and I'll print it for you. It's as simple as that. If someone's using your Wi-Fi very often, a guest or something for a long time, and they're going to be there for a year or something, you probably want them on your main network, as long as their device is all secure and everything. So But if it's a guest or something like that, keep them. You don't need people connecting to your printers. That's just a security hole there you can do. So kind of think about that when someone's like, I need to print something. Say, just email it to me and I'll print it out for you. No big deal. That's all they need to do. And without that isolation, like I said, guest, the word guest here, it's just a polite label. So with it on, it's a real wall that someone can't actually start using, devices against you. So we want to isolate that. So where every device actually belongs, we already talked about a lot of this, but I'm going to go quickly over this one more time. And this is the two words that you should really focus on when you're thinking about guest network. Is the item that you want on the network secure, meaning that you trust the item? It's your item that you need and everything like that, like your computer or whatever. Is it something you trust? Is it something that you wouldn't mind it to be able to connect to your computer or whatever it might be? Is that something you trust? And when it comes to smart devices, these are things that you need to move to your guest network. Things that you're not communicating. Maybe it's a third-party app or something that someone's using, a thermostat or something like that. Whatever it might be, you might want to be bringing those things over to your guest network. That way they're isolated away from you, especially when it comes to plugs, those little light bulbs, things of that nature. Any Chinese-made Internet of Thing device that you've bought on the internet that you wanted to save $1 or $2 definitely should be on a guest network. That's something that you shouldn't trust, even if it is trustworthy. And the manufacturer says that a lot of these things that cost $9 or very pennies on the dollar, they're not maintaining them. So make sure that you put it on your guest network. So there's a good list here. If you have any of these items already on your main network, you should probably move it to your guest network. What are the items that we need to keep on our main Wi-Fi? Those are the items you trust, okay? Laptops, desktops, phones and tablets, printers, NAS, file servers, home backups, anything you need to talk to your other devices. Those are things that you need on your network. That way you can share and use the resources how they're intended. So this is a good rule of thumb here. If it has a screen, you type a password into, it goes on your main network. If it's a gadget that listens, watches, or speaks, the guest network. So if you have something that you type your password into, that's an important part. And that's like a computer, like we said, desktops, tablets, all that kind of thing. Most of these smart devices, you don't have to type a password. You connect it to the internet and it's good. It doesn't need anything. And because of that, we want to make sure that it's on the guest network. So these are common things that you need to put on that guest network. Even though you configure and ring or whatever and you log in to the account, the actual device doesn't have any login. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to the screen for each individual device and not an account. So 4 ways people defeat the point. A lot of people use the same password as their main Wi-Fi password. That's, like I said, defeats the point of having separate networks if someone can just connect to either or. A lot of times people use the same network and they'll just add a 2 in the end. This doesn't help. The phone will auto connect to whatever it sees first. So if you get it wrong or tries to connect to it sometimes and it's a very similar name, it might try to connect to the guest one, and now your phone is on something that you don't trust. So kind of keep these names different. Whatever your Wi-Fi name is, and then you'll have your guest network. That way you know clearly that what you're connected to. Sometimes people choose and turn off client isolation, or the actual manufacturer of the router keeps it defaulted off. And we want to make sure that's on. We want to make sure that's set up. That way guest devices can't talk to each other. And sometimes sometimes there's little firewall rules where it allows you to go into the main network of the guest. So we want to make sure the client isolation is toggled on. That's a very big part. Sometimes it doesn't prompt it, so you just have to hopefully your router will tell you that if they're not isolated or if it's got everything on the other thing. But you always, if the settings there, always toggle it on. Share your passwords publicly without ever rotating. If you somehow give your password out, if it's an Airbnb especially, rotate your passwords out. It doesn't take much to be able to get a wealthy Airbnb, rent one in a major city around a hospital or whatever, and then a doctor rents it as well later on, and you've got the same password as that doctor, and now you're on the internet traffic with that doctor or whatever. You just compromise that doctor or that Airbnb. Hopefully the doctor's using a VPN or whatever to try to protect its the state, but it's the same thing. Don't share the passwords publicly. You want to change those out, especially with Airbnbs and stuff like that. Don't send them in group text. Don't sit them in there. It should be changed, often, if you're giving it out to certain people or guests. If you're doing it in your own home environment, which 95% of you are probably doing right now, is in your home environment, you don't have guests coming over often. Well, you don't have to change that password often if you're using it by yourself. If you're using it for your Internet of Thing devices, which you should, smart devices, you don't have to change it all the time. That's a big part of it. It's only when you're giving out that information often or it gets compromised. So keep an idea of who you're sharing that to. It says a lot of questions is, won't a second network slow my internet? And the answer really is no. It won't, because routers are designed this way. They're designed to be able to route traffic, whether you have one network or two networks. It just adds a couple little more numbers to an IP or whatever, or changes a little number on the IP, and that's it. There's no big change in what's going on. It's the same Wi-Fi radio signals that are going on, the same antennas, no extra equipment. It's just a different subnet. So that's the difference between the two different IPs and everything. So most routers cap guest traffic, so it can't drown out the main. So that's a cool setting that a lot of manufacturers have. Is it basically does quality of service for the main people and leaves your guest as the next one. So that's a cool part that you can do as well in your own spot. So you'll never notice, especially if it's used in daily, you'll never notice that. But you'll have two separate networks, and they'll all share that same router. The very exception to this rule is older routers. A 7-year-old router would have a little bit of exception to this rule, and that's with because of that, the technology and what you're transferring these days, it will slow it down because there's only so much CPU and RAM usage on a router, and it might slow it down very little bit that you would notice. And in those cases, you should be upgrading your equipment every 7 years anyways. That way you have security vulnerabilities done, everything's checking out, and you have the latest standards when it comes to encryption, which we talked about in our last week, which was WAPA3. You want to get rid of those old routers that are 7+ years old, because they're causing a lot of risk in your home environment. They're not getting patched. They got old standards that are easy to crack, so it's like a playground for any kind of threat actor to start working on there. So if you do notice the slowdown, that might be a good sign to actually switch your router. If you buy a $20 router, what do you expect? To have infinite life on that router? The difference is like if I had a $300 router that I bought 7 years ago versus a $20 router, who do you think is going to have more redundancy or have a little more lifespan to it when it comes to that? Yeah, of course, the 300. It's going to be able to adopt new security parts, vulnerability changes when the patching and everything like that, and it's going to have RAM and the CPU power to be able to do those tasks when it comes down to it. So, you pay for what you get when you talk about routers and anything really in the world. So, if your router can't run that guest Wi-Fi without choking, it's also struggling to keep your main network secure. So, food for thought with that. So, you want a router you can depend on. So what can I do today? This is a 15-minute to-do list that you can do tonight. You can sign into that router like we talked about with your admin password. Either you created it or it's on the bottom of that router. And you can turn on Guest Wi-Fi under wireless, guest network, one little toggle there. You want to set a different name and a different password than your network. And then you want to flip that client isolation on to on if you can. And then you want to move every smart device to that guest network. So you'll just log in and connect those devices as you go. If you have 100 devices or 20 or whatever, just do 5 at a time. If you did 5 one week and then 5 the next, each time you're bringing one of those over, you're just taking less risk out of it. So it's great. So just move them one at a time as you can. Repair each one, and then you got it. So it's easy peasy when you come to it. Appreciate you watching this week. This is week 2, and we're going to be talking about week 3, the eyes and ears and the wall. We're going to talk about how there's some of these things are actually listening to you, and how you can turn off some of these settings and stuff to keep these things from listening to you, whether it be muting certain devices like your Alexas or whatever. You can turn those settings off. That way they're not sending back information back to the manufacturer. And like we said, bringing them to the guest Wi-Fi is good too, because they're not collecting information about what items are in your house and what's going on. So we're going to talk about that, and that's the eyes and ears, how those smart home devices have risk, and they hear stuff and they record things and they send them back. Why do you think your TV went from $1,000 to $300? You know, it's a serious thing. It's not because everything got cheaper. It's because maybe they're selling your data. So you might want to think about that. As always, we offer solutions for your home and business needs. If you don't have some sort of IT professional that's taking care of your home or your business needs, and you're looking to do that, we do that as well. We do Wi-Fi setups and stuff. If you're in Western North Carolina here, we do managed services and do all kinds of different optimizations and EDR points and stuff for clients all over the country here. So if you need anything, we're here for you. Just reach out to us. Our web address here is marshilltechnology.com. Happy to help you with that. We've actually restructured a little bit of this stuff, so some of these pages are no longer there, but our information and our contacts all there. If you need help with anything, just reach out to us on that information. So thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week for week 3.